So it seems that we are officially starting this online conference, which
Recording in progress.
Which title is Recycling in the Performing Arts from Creativity to Commerce. My name is Ivan Medenica. I am the director of AICT conferences, a theater critic and a scholar from Belgrade, and I will be your host today, but not from Bratislava, where the event is organized, but from my hometown Belgrade. And in Bratislava, we have Zuzana Uličianska, who is the main key figure of this whole event with her technical team. If there would be some problems, but we hope it won't happen. So I will, at the very beginning, just briefly introduce this conference, which is very exceptional one. First of all, regarding the time frame in which it has been conceived and prepared and realized. The first ideas for this conference appeared at least 2 years ago. At the AITC ExCom meeting in Chicago in November 2019, we made committee for organizing a conference that was supposed to be part of the IATC Congress in Bratislava in spring 2020. This committee, conference board, members of this committee were Zuzana Uličianska herself, Savas Patsalidis, who is the editor-in-chief of our journal, Critical Stages, and professor from the Aristotle University from Thessaloniki. I will introduce all of them a bit later. And Deepa Punjani, our colleague from India, from Mumbai. In collaboration with the Theatre Institute in Bratislava, we conceived and framed and fashioned this topic with few different paradigms regarding the notion of recycling in theatre and performing arts in general. Savas will later introduce these main theoretical guidelines, so to say, these main paradigms that we developed for the call for papers. Then it happened that everything was cancelled in our lives. First of all, the Congress itself was cancelled. We didn't have the Congress, so we didn't have the conference within the Congress. In the meanwhile, the Congress happened for the first time in the history of the International Association of Theatre Critics online, but only the General Assembly. So we didn't have our side programs, and the main side program is the conference itself, Congress conference itself. But then Zuzana informed us that there will be an opportunity, to organize it later, in autumn, in fall this year. So finally we realized that the conference will happen, but for the same reasons, which is pandemics, restriction in international traveling, etc., travels, we decided to divide this conference into two parts. So it's again, a new thing in conceiving and organizing IATC conferences. So the first part of this conference happened a month ago, and it was a live / hybrid format. It happened in Bratislava. It was international in the sense that there were participants from different countries, but the working languages of this conference, of this first part of our conference, were only Slovak and Czech. So it was international, but based on local languages, so to say. And this event is a truly international second part of the conference, which will be held only in English, as you know. So this is a short, brief history overview of this as you would agree, I imagine, very, very special conference, a unique conference in the history of the International Association of Theatre Critics. This conference was conceived by the team I have already mentioned, but organized by the Slovak Center of the IATC. And I use this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude to Zuzana Uličianska, who is the president of the Slovak National Center of IATC, and in cooperation with Theatre Institute Bratislava, and the fund LITA, which is a society of literature, LITA fund. So these are three co-organizers of the conference, and once again I express my deepest gratitude to all of them to give us this opportunity to meet and talk in these very strange circumstances for all of us. Now, although I have already introduced them, but I will do it once again. I will introduce people who will address you at the very beginning with their welcoming words. First of all, Jeffrey Eric Jenkins, who is the newly elected president of the International Association of Theatre Critics, our dear friend and colleague from Chicago, theatre critic and a scholar, professor at the Illinois University in Chicago. Good morning, Jeffrey. It's 7:00 a.m. in Chicago or something like that. So I am really very grateful for you to be so fit in such an early morning. It wouldn't be possible with me, I have to admit immediately. Then Savas Patsalidis, whom I also introduced, who is a professor of theater studies at the Aristoteles University in Thessaloniki, theater critic, festival curator, and from our perspective, from the perspective of the International Association of Theatre Critics, his most important function is that he is the editor-in-chief of our journal Critical Stages, which is really improving from one edition to another. And this is really something that we have always to be so grateful to Savas for this enormous and important achievement. And Zuzana is the third person, who is our main host today and the main organizer of the event. I have already also introduced her already, a theatre critic and the president of Slovak section of the IATC. So, Jeffrey, you are the first one to address us with your thoughts and ideas, general ideas about the topic, or, like IATC conferences in general. Then, as I said, Savas will introduce the main paradigms that we thought about when conceiving this title and this topic of the conference. And Zuzana will remind us of the first part of the conference that happened a month ago live in Bratislava. So, Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivan. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Eric Jenkins. I'm president of the International Association of Theatre Critics and professor of theater at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. It is my honor to greet you from the United States this morning and to offer my gratitude to Zuzana Uličianska and the leadership of the Slovak Center of the AICT for hosting this important conversation on recycling in the performing arts, from creativity to commerce. There is an extraordinarily impressive series of presentations that we are about to see and hear. I also want to add our thanks to Theatre Institute Bratislava and the LITA Fund for providing key support to make this event happen under the current challenging conditions. As we find ourselves in a time of apparently unceasing challenge on crucial fronts such as public health, economic distress, and a disturbing rise of authoritarianism in governments and in the public square, it is fitting for those of us who care about the future of humanity and humane discourse to consider the cycles and the recycles that bring us to this moment. The conference organizers remind us that even William Shakespeare was a master of the recycling of various materials, the history of England, medieval legends, Greek myths, and the like. So too, the theatrical impulse was born from a consideration of the nature of the human life cycle, birth, life, death, and the possibility of rebirth. In the spirit of life cycles, recycling, and the future of humanity, I want to take a moment to recognize and acknowledge that I live and work on the native lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascouten, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, my university has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have grown, that have allowed for the growth of the University of Illinois for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. In the practical world, we seek to find responsible, sustainable methods of creating theater that will leave smaller carbon footprints, will reduce our impact on the environment, and will allow for the possibility that our children and their children will be able to live their lives in somewhat happier and less tumultuous times. Theater artists in the United States have become increasingly interested in finding ways to create theater that is more sustainable and less consumptive. The Broadway Green Alliance is based in New York, but has expanded its reach throughout the country. The BGA provides a wide range of video and other practical resources created by theater artists and theater artisans who are dedicated to sharing best practices for environmental sustainability in a field that had for too long not focused on resource conservation. As a theater producer here at the university, I have worked closely with directors and designers to find ways we might create work with materials that can be reused again and again, whether for the creation of theater or for building materials that could be used in more permanent construction projects. This is only one way, obviously, of thinking about recycling in the performing arts. My good friends Ivan Medenica and Savas Patsalidis will further set the tone for today's conversation, and I am grateful for the leadership that they bring to this topic, which contains, as we will see, many topics. The lights are glowing again in our theaters here in the United States, and let's hope that they are using sustainable technology. I've been to New York twice in the past month, and my newspaper here in Illinois has begun to send me back into the local theaters. Despite being required in New York to show proof of vaccination and to wear a mask at all times in the theater building, Seeing 5 shows in 4 days a week or so ago really breathed new life into my spirit. After 18 months in a theatrical desert, simply to be present in a public environment, engaged in a shared experience, lifted me in a way that I thought might not have been possible after endless quarantines, cultural alienation, and the ongoing social disruptions that we have suffered this past 2 years. There is the possibility of renewal on the horizon, which I think is also a kind of recycling. I look forward to the ideas and conversations in which we are about to engage this afternoon and this evening. We still face many challenges, but I am encouraged by the possibility that stretches before us. I am grateful to you, to all of you, for participating, and I'm grateful for being invited to participate. Let's get restarted. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, very much for these very warm words, and which go beyond the how to say ceremonial address and could be included really in the presentations. So yeah, let's start with some kind of recycling of past normality. So would you like, Savas, to tell us what were our ideas when we started developing this project once upon a time in pre-COVID times?
Hello, everybody. Basically, Ivan, I tried to kind of redirect my brief commentary away from what we originally written down, because I thought that what we wrote down, we circulated, so people more or less know the paradigms and know the concept. So I felt like playing the devil's advocate here by raising questions related to what we are about to hear in this meeting. But first of all, let me say this, that Ivan and Jeffrey said it all. So let me just also congratulate our dear friend Susanna, who never gave up the idea of this conference, which we had originally planned, as you said, Ivan and Jeffrey, 2 years ago, as part of IATC's World Congress, an event which the pandemic forced us to postpone. And here we are now online, optimistic and determined, thanks to the well-orchestrated efforts of Susanna and her team of collaborators to bring this important project finally back to life. Susanna, thank you so much for all this. Ivan, thank you for being again into that all the way, and everybody else. I will speak about 6-7 minutes, basically raising questions. I will recycle mostly, directly or indirectly, questions related to the 3 paradigms of this conference. Questions rather than answers. Let me start with a brief definition according to dictionaries. What is recycling? Recycling is an important part of our lifestyle, of our living on this planet and sharing this planet. It is one of the major issues of this new century. Dictionaries define recycling as a process of converting waste materials into new materials and objects. The recovery of energy from waste materials is often included in this concept. The act of recycling, however, is also applied to the performing arts in multiple contexts. It is not my intention to elaborate on this context, just to point out their complexity and interesting crisscrossings. For example, if we accept the notion that says recyclability of a material depends on its ability to reacquire the properties it had in its original state, does this also apply to the arts as well? Is it possible to reacquire the properties of the original, whatever that original is? Is this the aim of recycling artistic material? And if it is not, why recycle at all and not look elsewhere for inspiration? If recycling implies, among other things, the collection of waste, does recycling in the arts also imply the collection of artistic waste? And if it does, why then recycle? And if it does not, and if it is not waste that is recycled, why recycle at all? Put it in a different phrasing. We understand, if we accept the understanding of recycling in practical terms as an alternative to conventional waste disposal that can save material and help lower greenhouse gas emissions and other problems the planet faces, how does this apply to the arts? Does the act of recycling lower anything or elevate anything? Are there any gains from recycling already known stuff without damaging or distorting our knowledge of what is already known? Does recycling Shakespeare, for example, prevent the waste of Shakespeare? And how much Shakespeare is required in its recycled version to still be called Shakespeare? If the ideal implementation of recycling material is to produce a fresh supply of the same material, why should then recycle Shakespeare, for example, if the goal is to produce a fresh supply of Shakespeare? Does repeated recycling in the arts destroy whatever purity one finds in the original, as it does in the recycling of objects, say paper? Or there is no such thing as purity, so any form of recycling goes? And who sets the limits? Does recycling of theater redirect value output in the cultural system? And what about copyrights? Do copyrights have an owner or owners in this recycling ritual? Is there any owner who owns more than the others? Of course, we do not bear gifts to Athens. The idea of recycling has always been with us in artistic forms, and all these questions I raised were with us for many, many decades, so we break no new ground here. Human civilization is a history of recycled materials. And since we are born into that history, we are spoken by its recycled constituent elements, and our arts as well. They are byproducts, offshoots, appropriations, adaptations, spin-offs of something else. Think of the major classic tragedians who used to recycle popular myths in their dramas. Think of Seneca, of Terence, of Shakespeare, of Goethe, and of course of the postmoderns. Think of all the major directors who recycle local and international stage aesthetics. Think of the recycling of stories, of acting style. And since we all seem to accept the fact that there is no originality, but an endless recycling process, why do we bother so much nowadays? Why all this talk, these conferences, these round tables, this debate about this all-time classic, recycling? I think the reason there is so much talk nowadays about recycling has to do mostly with the progress of technology and the changes it has caused. At first, industrialization in the 19th century, and then high technology have spurred demand for affordable materials. Higher demand gave birth to higher produced volume and thus cheaper commodities, among them recycled artistic commodities, such as painting, statues, and other things that only upper-class people who had money could buy. Technology made all these things affordable, copies of all these things affordable, not the original. If recycling reduces cost by simplifying the process of production, can we claim that in the arts, recycling increases speed and volume by decreasing imagination and creativity? Can recycling support speedier artistic growth and value by maximizing the volume of existing artifacts, or simply speedier consumption? Manufacturers of beverage bottles, for example, offer refundable recycling deposit. And I'm just wondering, in the future, will there be, metaphorically speaking, something similar in the arts when they are no longer of use? That is, does recycling theater means faster production line and subsequently larger amount of theater waste? Does an art easily produced through recycling imply an art easily forgotten and thrown away? In the late 19th century, new industries promised to transform valueless materials into valuable materials. Does contemporary theater recycling manage to do that as well? Help new values appear from valueless venues? In the market, there are certain materials that are not recyclable, as they are deemed dangerous or hazardous. Can there be any limits in the form of recycled theater art? Is there a recyclable and non-recyclable theater art? And who defines that? With all this in mind, how do we envision the impact of recycling on the future of the arts? Does recycling threaten to create manufactured arts as opposed to natural, creative arts? Like we have farmed forests as opposed to natural forests. A tree that grows in a farmed forest is much smaller than the natural one that grows in a natural forest, and that is a fact. Does that apply to the arts as well? A recycled play is quality-wise necessarily smaller than the original play or not? And last but not least, would recycling lead to a global culture of sameness now that technology is the measure of all things? Instead of pursuing distinct difference, do we support this global idea of sameness? And can theater contribute to global ecology? And in what ways? These, among other, are other questions buzz in my head every time I reflect on the problematics of recycling. Questions that directly relate to the three main paradigms of this conference: the artistic, the cultural, and the ecological. And I'm really glad to be part of this conference that brings into focus vital aspects of this problematic. Thank you, Susanna, and thank you, Ivan and Jeffrey, for all this. I wish all participants the best. I very much look forward to listen to what you all have to say. I hope I didn't spoke too long. I promised only a few minutes, but I had all these questions. Basically, I know questions you all know, but I thought that I'd better, share them with you just in case, we would like to discuss them later. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Savas. Thank you very much, Savas. I think it was really a great idea not to present us something, as you said, which we had the opportunity to read, how we developed and how we defined these three paradigms, this artistic, cultural, and ecological aspect of recycling in theater or recycling theater, but to propose, as a matter of fact, few important questions for our debates, and I hope we will really keep an important amount of time for this final discussion at the end of the conference. Thank you once again, Savas.
Thank you.
Susanna, I would like to ask you to present us, to give us a short summary of the first part of the conference, which, as I have mentioned many times, happened on my birthday on the 15th of October this year. So, Zuzana.
Yeah,
please.
Happy birthday to you, Ivan.
A month later, yeah.
Month later. Greetings from Bratislava. It's very nice weather today, and it's still afternoon of the night of the theater, and so I would like just say that we are at the moment in the framework of a bigger event that is taking place in a couple of European countries, and this is some PR event to spread the information about cultural and especially theatrical activities. So thank you all for joining us. It's really up to me to thank you all and all the contributors. I would like to be just very, very brief. There are much more important things to be said. I am just adding to Sava's question few more that were raised by my colleagues during the event in Bratislava. They also asked the question whether we should talk about recycling anytime we are producing a classic play. So that was really like sort of attempt to ask a question whether we should really talk about recycling. We were talking about recycling in the opera sphere. I am very grateful to my colleagues Michaela Mojžišová and Robert Bayer, who were talking from the perspective of opera, and they made very important comments on how the full packages of ready to made operas are traveling around the world, and how it's limiting maybe local production to the extent that we only are importing complete versions of production. But also it can have some special by-side effects, such as that sometimes this recycled opera is more inspiring in a different context, and or vice versa. Something that was very shocking on a first time is dull and boring 10 years later in a different country. We were also talking about the ecological aspects, but I leave it to Misha Rigrova that is joining us today. And I will just mention my colleague Milo Jurani, who spoke about reciclation of the post-apocalyptic images and media images in our context. He stresses that we are such overload with the bad news all the time, and that it's not very efficient anymore to make us really react and to make us do something in ecological way. So his presentation was very very important and practical and inspired. And then we were talking about recykling and documentary projects, and even in ballet, we all know that the classical ballet is full of recycled, like Marius Petipa choreographies, etc. And not but least, we had Ludwig Kavin from Vienna. He's a Czech immigrant who led the theater Bread in Vienna, and he brought us very interesting story of recycling the book by Ivan the nutshell in the theater adaptation of this bestseller book. So this is basically all, and I'm very glad that those who could not make it to the first part, such as Rudo Leška, will be there later on with us and open the topic in the sphere of copyrights and authors' rights as well. So thank you once more.
Thank you, Susanna, very much for reminding us what were the topics discussed a month ago at the first part of our conference. And we are pretty punctual. Now we start with the first, so to say, panel, although we have already explained that this conference does not have a classical structure of different panels, but some kind of structure had to be made. So yeah, just a moment. The first presentation is by two authors, Michaela Rigorova and Martina Peckova-Černá from Czech Republic, from Czech Institute of Arts, Theatre Institute, Prague. And the title of their presentation is Sustainability in Czech Theatre, More Than a Maintenance. Michaela is with us, and I imagine that Michaela will present the paper she wrote together with her colleague. And Michaela is somebody who is well known in the region, in Czech Republic and Slovakia, as one of the first experts who raised the issues of ecological sustainability in theatre. So we are very glad that we can start this conference with your presentation, Michaela. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for this lovely introduction, and thank you all for having me and giving me the honor to actually start as the first panelist. I'm here representing the...
Sorry, Michaela, just because you're the first one and I didn't mention the approximate time of your presentations, of each presentation should be 15 minutes.
I will do my best to sustain this time frame for all of us. Thank you once again. Ivan introduced me and also Martina Černá-Peckova, but Martina will at the end not be able to join us because, as Zuzana already said, today is the European Theatre Night, and this huge event is right now undergoing in Czech Republic and Prague, and Martina is really busy. And then sends regards to all of you. So I will be here today presenting and talking about the endeavors of Art and Theatre Institute in Prague in the past few years, and especially in year 2020, which was thematically in the realms of the theatre night, about sustainability and sustainability in a long term, and not just in a way of sustaining things like maintaining, but to really encouraging them and making them nurturing them and making them flower. As I said, the Arts Institute, or I should say at the beginning, the Arts Institute, Theatre Institute, is dedicated to promotion of the arts and providing information, education, and consultation, and performing research in this field. And it encourages strategic approach to culture, and it supports and connects culture professionals and artists across different disciplines, while it also contributes to their professional growth on the national and international scene. And in this sense, this all is also included in the activities around the theatre night, which in the Czech Republic is since year 2008, and Theater Institute is its coordinator since 2013. And this is event which usually has a huge attendance, around 40 to 70,000 audiences and participants during the whole day and night, because the theaters and cultural institutions are open not only in the usual hours and usual places, but it opens up in new ways. And theaters are organizing not only shows, but workshops, talks, and other things which puts them in a different light and in a different coordination with the audience. Last year, or every year, the theater night has some overarching theme. And for 2020, it was the sustainability. It was chosen before pandemic happened, and then the pandemic in 2020 put it in not in completely new light, but brought another very important themes and new dimensions to it. It's the global problems, of course, climate crisis, one of them, and ecologically more sound behavior and overproduction, which was already mentioned here in the opening questions by first speakers. Yes, by Savas. Theater night usually gathers around 140 theaters and cultural institutions who are involved. For example, this year it is over 70 right now, with scheduled 259 programs for audiences. In 2020, of course, the program was supposed to be huge, also happening during the year, and then many things were canceled, but Theater Institute found another ways how to connect, and made several workshops, talks, conferences, and of course, it also reached out and started or organized big research within the participants of the theaters and art institutions in Czech. And this research was really concerned on the sustainability and ecological behavior in theaters. And it was sent to more than 140 theaters. And we got back almost 40 fully answered and submitted research papers from them. And these answers are available on the webpage, and it showed that the theaters are very much interested in ecological questions in the production, in the arts and the dramaturgy. But sometimes they are not sure what steps they should make and how to approach these themes, because it's so complex that it can be really hard to actually see what to do. You know, sometimes for all the trees, we don't see the forest, or for the forest, we don't see the trees. Theater Institute then organized some workshops on this theme, and started to think how to explain these endeavors, and how to also kind of step up its game, even though Theater Institute itself has activities which is doing in the more environmentally just behavior. So we were working on the environmental codex for the Theater Institute, which is also offered and published publicly to other theaters, and it should be kind of like an inspirational manifesto for others to see how they can stand publicly, how they can state publicly their approach to ecology and sustainability in their organization. And the codex shows and talks about how theater institutes sense to the environment. It talks about the production, mobility, propagation, dramaturgy, because it's very important, or the art program itself, and communication. It talks about the impact and education and also improvements which can be done. It is put on the pillars, or it is explained on the pillars of social, economic, and environmental ways. And we divided our talks or our manifesto in the several ways, where we talk about people, which includes the team in the theater and also the audience, and the communication is connected with it. And then about the place, which may be the physical place of the theater or where the project is happening, and mobility. And then production, which there is the actual production where recycling is very important, huge part. And of course, under production is the art and dramaturgy. We kind of outlined some practical steps which theaters might do kind of to help them to reach their goals. And that is to make few steps one at a time, like look at themselves and actually see what they are doing, who they are, and what they need in these endeavors, and put down the priorities. Then more detail, to try the more detailed mapping of their activities and plans, and making the overall plan kind of a vision, what they wanna approach, and then make the action plan really step by step, what, when, who, by what time frame they will work. And the third plan is the follow-up plan, or monitoring, and make it a cycle, so they can evolve and not just stagnate in the first changes they make. This, of course, led into more workshops and talks, and we recognize that theaters might, or the institutions or the teams in the theaters might feel a little bit alone in their endeavors. And another huge project started, and that is green map of theaters in Czech Republic. So we were working on the online tool they can theaters and art institutions can use. And right now, like the simple questionnaire, they can sign in, explain what they are doing in the field of ecological and sustainable behavior in their institution, and be placed on the map of our country to see where they stand and where others stand, what kind of topics they do. Our main, how to say, categories are, for example, recycling, dramaturgy, production, energy savings, waste management, but we also have a space there for possible collaboration and others. So theaters can now sign up, explain what they are doing, and connect with others. And we did this because of the educational value and also the networking value, which is always great, because you don't feel like one drop in the sea, but you actually start to make the waves together and help each other with sharing information, experiences, and sharing the ideas on the projects or endeavors. Right now on the map is very few theaters, mostly in Prague, But we believe that because this is a work in progress, it's a networking, so others will come and share their experiences and well, what they want to do and how they want to connect with others. But for example, in the first days when we let this map go online, we had an interesting and very rewarding thing happened, and that's a completely new organization which theaters didn't really know that exists in Prague, and it's a new organization, Art for Use, which actually is organization dedicated to collecting old, unused materials from theaters, art institutions, and other institutions, even from ordinary people. It is based in Prague, and so this institution collects all these materials, objects, and then offers it back to theaters, arts institutions, schools, and it does it for free. So they are kind of like a logistical, not taking the materials people and organizations don't need anymore, and which would become waste, and they provide temporary warehouse where they are available for others to come, take them, and make art of it. And thanks to our map, now it's on a map, and information about it is spreading around, and people are using it more and more. So that was a kind of a quick run through our 2020 year and the endeavors, which were the theater night, the sustainability, and our activities. This is research, codex, and the map. So from kind of philosophical and theoretical thing to very practical map, which is now working and here for all the theaters and artists.
Thank you, Michaela, very much for this general overview of your project. And I'm sure that we would have some questions that we would be interested in some details of the project or certain aspects. So I'm expecting questions to be asked. But now we are switching to the second speaker. Our second speaker today, Li Hua Wan. I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not the perfect one, who is our colleague, a theater critic, a professor at Sangmyung University in South Korea, and the representative of the Center for the Arts Beyond Boundaries. The title of our dear colleague's presentation is Recycling or Upcycling in Performing Arts, focused on project of arts beyond boundaries, time travel of a wandering theater troupe. So, Lee, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for a nice presentation for me. I'm very glad to be here. Finally, I was wondering if our conference would be wasted because of the COVID and etc. But finally, we just have this chance to meet and talk, at least through Zoom. Okay, now I start my presentation, and let me share documents. The title, as you already mentioned, Recycling or Upcycling in Performing Arts, focused on projects of arts beyond boundaries, time travel of a wandering theater troupe. I would like to more focus on a specific cultural event and analyze more about the aspect of recycling and upcycling of that project. Okay. The notion of recycling can be considered in various ways, in the field of performing arts. Recycling is considered in general as a process of converting waste into reusable material. We can measure the recyclability according to the state of similarity of the recycled material with the original one. The notion of upcycling differs slightly from the notion of recycling, since it seeks to achieve an artistic or environmental value through the process of transforming the waste into a new material. In his book, L'espace littéraire, the eminent French literary and cultural critic Maurice Blanchot describes how an author as an individual faces death while producing a literary work. Once the writer loses his life, the space of loss eventually becomes a space of presence that allows the open communication with the world where the another from the outside imbues. An author as a subject withers away and faces death. At the same time, the work enters a persistent process by encountering the world of readers and the outside world, by living its own life and reproducing its existence and meaning. Fundamentally, an artwork forms a persistent structure where it endlessly produces meanings and functions in the space of communication, produced at the cost of the ostracized author's life. In such an aspect, the act of creating artwork is closer to upcycling that adds new artistic or environmental values to the waste than recycling, which assumes closer approaches to the original use. In performing arts, script writers, as well as directors, producers, and performers brings the art to life, and the audience's appreciation completes the entire performance. The author who faces death in terms of Blanchot is not the only person in performing arts. The planner, producer, designer, staff, and actors all leave their original existence behind as they enter the space for performance. The space is filled by an act of spectatorship. The new value of enjoyment of art is produced instead of the creator's disposed life, suggesting the process of upcycling. Based on the concept of upcycling in the process of creation and reception of performing arts, one of the projects of Arts Beyond Boundaries, Time Travel of Wandering Theater Troupe, will be reviewed in this presentation. The projects of Arts Beyond Boundaries started in 2007 in Mule area in Seoul, Korea, where more than 800 iron factories were located. The ironworks had gathered since the 1960s to form one of the most important spots for ironwork in Korea in the 1980s. Today, remaining factories alongside of old alleys keep the appearance of the 1960s, in contrast with the brand new surroundings of residential buildings and a huge shopping center. The factories are still productive, but on the verge of being wasted sooner or later. Theater goers of Center for Arts Beyond Boundaries moved into deserted rooms of a factory in 2006, finding out the alleys as an excellent stage. Project of Art Beyond Boundaries thus started and still continues as Via Fringe, a performance festival of alternative spaces. As an artistic project in the public space, it had found various spaces in the area to match a surprising aesthetic value. The area now is known as Mulle Art Village, with more than 300 artists and groups working independently, as well as Mulle Iron Valley. Theatrical intervention in the public space thus contributed to create the new identity of the area. You will see the landscape of Mulle area with all these factories and some art product together. Now, Time Travel of Wandering Theater Troupe, produced by me and scriptwriter and director Andy Ki-Hun-yoon, who is Korean but educated in Carnegie Mellon Drama School with his MFA in directing, and actors Young-ho Lee, Piri Jung, etc. They unfolds under the assumption that a wandering theater troupe from the 1930s appeared suddenly. The project embraces various cooperation of regional artists by adding diverse in-between plays to a popular Shinpa play style in the early 20th century. The project leverages a wide spectrum of artwork genres, ranging from plays, street plays, Shinpa play, mime play, dance, art, installation, illustration, to music, performance songs. And the project ends successfully with the neighbors asking when they will be back again from 1930s. It is composed of two parts, and in the part one, a wandering theater troupe in 1930s style appears across from Mulle Police Station, Yeongdeung-pogu in Seoul. It was in June 2008. The troupe members are all dressed in 1930s style, and they are shocked. They seem to be shocked by the strange space and the appearances of modern people. Similarly, passers-by are stunned at the troupe's appearance and continue to watch them closely. Due to the nature of the wandering troupe, they are meant to perform, wearing mysterious appearances that transcend time. The troupe scouts for the right space as they walk around the Mulle neighborhood. The encounter between the troupe from the past, the resident, and the diverse environment of Mulle make the passers-by both the viewers and the viewed. Here is the troupe wearing costumes of 1930s and their parade. And sometimes they stop to form a kind of tableau. And it's a street in the Mulle area. And it's in front of the shopping center. And McDonald's shop also appears. And in the part two, they arrive at the Mulle Park and they unpack at a large open space to prepare for their most popular repertoire, Lee Soo-il and Shin Soo-ne. The youngest of the troupe plays accordion to promote the show. A little while later, residents and passers-by take their seats at the space in front of the stage and enjoy various spectacles of the performance. They arrive at the park and people gathered waiting for the performance. And now we have the performance started. Lee Soo-il and Shin Soo-ne. It's 1930s style. A little like a melodrama in 19th century in Western world. And we think about the drama of the play. During the parade, the actors refrain from speaking lines and focus more on the bodily movement. It also includes impromptu performances. Lee Soo-il and Kim Sun-ae performed during the second part is shown on a fixed stage. The play is based on a popular story published in Mail Shinbo under the title of Jang Han-mong. The meaning is A Dream of Long Suffering by the writer Jo Il-jae from 1913 to 1915. This story is an adaptation of the Japanese novel called Konjiki Yasha. The meaning is Golden Demon by Ozaki Goyo. But this novel was also recently found to be based on a British writer, Charlotte Braham's Weaker Than a Woman, written in 1900. Jo Il-jae's play script based on the translated novel was performed on stage by Lim Sung-gu's Innovation Play Team in 1913, and soon it became the most popular performance. Amid the Western-style drama wave that inundated Korea, Jo's drama was performed in a more familiar Shinpa style. Since the first performance, the play went through ups and downs to be regarded as one of the best Korean plays. The 2008 performance rewrote the script and allocated it to blend smoothly in the play Time Travel of Wandering Theater Troupe. We see the cover of the novel by a British writer, Weaker Than a Woman, written in 1900, and cover of Japanese novel, and cover of its translation into Korean, Jang Han-mong. And Lee Soo-il and Kim Sun-ae played in 2008 in the park. Under the premise that a new value of artistic communication is produced through the spiritual death of the creator in the natural process of creating artwork, Time Travel of Wandering Theater Troupe also incorporates the process of upcycling in script writing and performance. The history of various physical usages in the play is noteworthy. As seen from above, the 2008 performance script for the story within a story, Lee Soo-il and Kim Sun-ae, is by product of English to Japanese rewriting, Japanese to Korean translation, as well as literary forms and the usage during the performance. Is it safe to assume that the output remains closer to recycling that remains nearer to the original value in every usage process? Or is it an upcycling with added new artistic values? If the original work is not published by mimicking under the same geographic, historical, and aesthetic context, but reinforced its social impact through repeated encounters with new readers and audience via a series of recreation process, then it is rather difficult to simply treat it as just a recycling. We can think about upcycling also in terms of the aesthetics of the performance. The street parade you already saw may remind the audience of the festival of Dionysus, or even traditional Korean street performances of the traditional mask dance. The origin of the parade is to promote plays and preview the show to the audience. However, the practice is no longer popular in today's performances. The street parade that gradually faded away in the history of theater constitutes an essential part in Time Travel of Wandering Theater Troupe as one section of the two-part play. In other words, it is an upcycle by constructing the first part where the wandering theater troupe of the past reappears and discovers the modern city. The performance in the parade that constitutes the first one of the two-parts play moves twice as slow as the usual. The tempo of the parade of the time among the troupe members wearing strange costumes are different and strange from the pedestrians watching the play throughout the performance. It implies that parade goes beyond simple performance but has more meaningful and significance and function.
Well, 3 more minutes, please. 3 more minutes.
Only 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay,
2 to
sorry.
3 minutes. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, in the second part, they have more unique scenes, bridge the past and present are added, and there are narrator, dancing scene, and many other scenes. Like we have narrator and musician differently from the original script, and we have traditional dance, popular songs from 1930s, and also beggars performance. The purpose to include a diverse spectrum of capacity among artists from the region and entertain spectators from various backgrounds. And we have some slight change of the ending of Jo Il-jae's script, ending scene. The space. The project includes the performance which fully utilizes various public spaces of the region. And we can witness the notable achievement of cycle of space where original identity is disposed to obtain the artistic value for creation and enjoyment of art. Ayonok, a plaza, all those apartment complex now bears the memory of a new space thanks to the mysterious appearance of the performance. When everything returns to normal, some of the public space is now used as space for art as a result of physical upcycle. So the area is now called Mulle Art Village, not only Mulle Iron Valley. Today's Mulle area, the factory and art places together. And in the basement of Iron Factory, there are some concerts and shows, and there are some artists supporting spaces constructed recently. Mulle Art Factory with all this facility for the artists, and also there are another supporting space, Sulsul Center, and all various artistic activities held there. And our projects of Art Beyond Boundaries now held under the name of Via Fringe in Mulle, and there are some photo studio transformed to a stage, and also a gallery transformed a performance place, and some art space becomes a stage for a theater, and a small hall becomes a place, nice stage for some new production. And audience experiences. All the adults who have not watched a performance for a while would be deeply involved and get excited at the scene where Simsune breaks up with her fiancé, Lee Soo-il. Just they said, this is great, when dancers' costume would fly in the air as they danced to the traditional music. Their excitement buried deep down come back to life and lights a new fire in time that is about to run out. For the younger audience, their lives transcend a space of time and enter a new space of time they have never experienced before. Audiences.
Thank you. Could you
time travel of wandering theater?
Yeah.
Okay, that is the conclusion.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Now, yeah, we have all these change in the area of cycled areas. And well, I'm thinking that upcycle in the field of arts, it is a persistent chapter that awaits another upcycling to be followed consistently. Okay, that's the end. Thank you for giving me one more minute.
No, thank you, Hwa-Won, for your very fascinating, really, presentation with a lot of materials which helped us to give a better impression of the project that you described, and which raised our interest, I'm sure, and I'm sure that there will be questions about the project of Arts Beyond Boundaries. Let us continue with one more presentation, and then I will open the first round of discussions. So I will divide discussions into 2 parts, not into 3 parts. So our next speaker is a dear friend whom I didn't see since very long ago.
That's right.
So
it's great to see you.
Very glad. Sorry for this personal approach, because Timea and myself, we didn't see each other for ages. Hello, Timea, and welcome to the conference. Timea Pap from Hungary, freelance theater critic from Budapest, deputy president of the Hungarian section, national section of AICT. Very short and very inspiring title: Recycle and Carry On.
Yeah.
So carry on, Timea.
Okay, but first I'm going to share my screen. So hello to you from the beautiful Budapest. This is a brilliant day today, and I hope my presentation will be at least as brilliant as this day. The subject of my paper is 2 recent productions of Katona József Theatre Budapest, directed by Gábor Máté, The Gypsies and Junkyard 2.0. They premiered in 2010 and 2019 respectively. The Gypsies was on the repertoire for 6 years, and Junkyard 2.0 will be back soon after the pandemic break. In terms of critical response, both productions have proved to be highly influential, thought-provoking, and controversial. Both represent 2 eras and consist of 2 works, an original as part or act 1, and a sequel as part or act 2. The latter ones obviously continue the story of the original material, chosen as the title, by mirroring them with contemporary Hungary with the traumatic events of our recent past. My aim is to analyze the transferability of the original materials and discuss the opportunities and the traps of this approach. Within the short time limits, I try to mention the theatrical languages of the performances. Now let's start with The Gypsies. It is a play by Jenő Tersanszky Józsi, originally premiered in 1923 under the title Sidike, that is Little Sidonie, the heroine of the play, and reworked by the author 7 years later under a new title, The Gypsies. It can be defined as a small-town Volksstück, a farce, or a theatrical tableau vivant. The heroes are musician gypsies, but as the contemporary critics noted, and I quote, only the dialect would have to be dropped and the same plot could be set among people of any other occupation. Here, occupation refers to the entire adjective structure, the musician gypsy, an elite and respected social class whom Tersanszky portrays without ethnic distinction. The play, based on a love quadrangle, combines comedy and melodrama. The conflicts, the intentions are clear, but it is not the story that is important, but the atmosphere as a whole. The play has not been performed in Hungary for decades. In the Katona József Theatre remain the names of Tersanszky's characters and roughly half of the 3 acts. An essentially comic brawl within a family born of jealousy without any ethnic background is the last moment that is left of it. And here begins the sequel. Now, as you could see in the excerpt, a figure in a dark suit and a ski mask appears on stage. He climbs up from the audience and shoots at the actors. Those on stage freeze in a freeze frame, and as the lights come up, black paint begins to drain down on the white walls. The victim of the murder is the head of the family. The strong theatrical gesture marks a strong change from what we have seen so far. After the caesura and the time jump, the story continues as an investigation with the intention of reflecting on the racially motivated Roma murders of 2008 and 9. The attacks, having planned with the intention of intimidating and inciting ethnic conflict, resulted in 6 deaths and several injuries. Christian Grecio's characters by sight appear to be the same, but in fact, they are completely different, but there is no causal link between them. The new part, the second act, especially with the characters from outside, the policeman, detective, doctor, journalist, addressing topical issues, has no analogy with the sweet, original Little Light comedy. The basic setting of the second part, the forensic investigation, is promising, since it aims at clarification, reckoning, search for details, summing up facts. Note, it does all, but without drawing conclusion, which is a good point. But with the names and the costumes that remain unchanged, it is also a dangerous choice of the director. Only one thing turns out to be unquestionable in the source of the investigation. The words of the individual characters, regardless of their backgrounds, are declaredly closed and totally incompatible in their fundamental values. However, the two parts, the tableau vivant and the thesis drama, ironically, fit together organically and logically along the stereotypes depicted. Just as there is no depth in Pershansky's drama, there is no depth in Grecio's. But while superficiality is perfectly acceptable for an interesting story, it is unfortunate for such a sensitive social issue, especially when both the starting and end point depict situations with no chance for understanding or dialogue. The basic setting of the 2010 Gypsies is fear, when everyone is afraid of the other. There are only disagreements, disparity, and enemies, and no one tries to approach anybody with empathy. It's a serious dramaturgical flaw and the mistake that this is justified only by generalities for each character and not by personal stories. And the result is a creation of new stereotypes. Junkyard is a novel by Endre Fejes, and it was published in 1962 with a resounding reception, but not without controversy. János Habetler Jr., a lathe operator, kills his brother-in-law in the junkyard of a factory where they both work. The mystery of this case attracts the attention of the writer, Fejes, who wants to know the motive of the perpetrator, who remains stubbornly silent. The writer begins to investigate, and as he meets and interviews more and more people, he learns the story of the Habetler family from the beginning of the First World War to the 1960s. Although the political climate in Hungary had already eased by that time, what happened in a working class environment was still considered sensitive. The Habetlers have a strong family bond, for which the mother is responsible, and it is manifested in the festive dishes. Each generation tries to break the barriers and transcend social constraints, and the children are always more ambitious than their parents. But the Habetlers live their lives regardless of the radically changing world around them. The tragic historical events affect the family, but not any of them is experienced as cataclysm. They live exactly as they did before. János Jr. is the only one who senses this is not right, but cannot detect and articulate the problem. The novel quickly became a theatrical sensation. The writer himself adapted it for the stage immediately after the publication. It was quickly performed in 6 theaters within 2 years, but by the 70s, it suddenly waned from the repertoire. This particular play, shortened, is the first act of Katona's production. István Tasnádi retains the grotesque idyll, the empathetic and ironic portrayal, but he simplifies and condenses the story by merging or deleting characters and conflicts and eliminating repetitions. Now again, a short excerpt. You saw the murder, and as in the Gypsies, the director Gábor Máté concludes the original story with a strong theatrical gesture. After the murder, the young actor playing Habetler Jr. lightly turns to the audience and sends them to get some fresh air while he serves his prison sentence. It'll be 15 years, he adds. The first act spans from 1918 to 1968, the second one to 2018. As a family story, as a linear chronicle, there are characters whose fate we follow, whilst others are abandoned because they die or for any other reason. And as the family grows, new characters are added. Junkyard is a polyphonic novel. It can be read in many different ways, as a proletarian family novel, a reportage, a detective novel, even as a pseudo-sociography. This polyphony affects the staging. The choices made in the adaptation of the source material cannot be ignored in rewriting. In the first part of the drama, there is a dominant point of view, that of Habetler Jr.'s, who act as a narrator through the first 50 years of the family. The second part continues the story by using certain motifs, but the conflicts, the situations, and the characters are less developed and dominant, and the dominant point of view disappears. At the same time, external historical events become more dominant, but the play reflects on them only at the level of cliches. The cyclical view of time in Endre Fejesi's work is subordinated to family rituals conducted by the mother. Her death puts an end to this cyclical view of time, and as a result, the story breaks away from it, even if the tradition is carried on. From this point on, even if the new structural relations are based on the old, it is still problematic to continue. István Tasnádi uses certain fragments of the original plot, tries to match the new characters with Fejesi's heroes, that is, the descendants and the antecedents, by means of their parallel and contrasting fates. On the two photos, you can see two couples, Ági Szirtes playing two Mrs. Habetlers. On the upper one, she's the Urmutter of all, Mária Pék, in the 1920s or 30s. And on the second one, she's Krista Sós, the wife of Maria's grandson in the 1980s. The success of Endre Fejesi's Junkyard can be explained by the fact that, and I quote from the 1960s, it redefines the meaning of the family as a form of existence, and this process necessarily manifests itself in a new poetic literary test. This reinterpretation and redefinition are missing in the 2019 version. So both plays attempt to address collective traumatic experiences of the Hungarian society in fictional form and content. Neither the Gypsies nor Junkyard 2.0 engages with current politics, thus giving us a chance to find a common perspective on past and present. At the same time, perhaps because of their close temporal proximity, there are no therapeutic or cathartic either. However, they can lead to putting on the right questions. In order to do this, the creators need to look closely at the chosen subject of their study. it is clear from Tershansky's short stories prior to the Gypsies that he was familiar with the word he wrote about. Fejes also felt at home, treating his heroes with a sense of responsibility and depicting the complexity of the situation, the motivations, and their repressed emotions resulting from their traumatization. Christian Grecu and István Tasnádi are also well informed, but unlike Tershansky and Fejes, they present case studies. Their position is one of the observers. Their panorama is broad and representative, but while distancing themselves, they do not seek to explore the connections behind the chaos of events and to unravel the social and/or moral causes. In both productions, there are hints of thinking outside the box, but these momentums are only inclusions. One of these momentums are the sets designed by Balázs Cigler. The abstract spaces, essentially unchanged by the passage of time, place the stories in continuity and put them in a perspective regarding history on a personal and a national level, in almost a mythical space, while the realistic props, as well as Onik Füzér's costumes, indicate status and precisely orientate the audience. My conclusion is writing a sequel makes
2 minutes max.
Yes, writing a sequel. There's just one sentence.
No, please.
Writing a sequel may seem a promising idea, especially when dealing with history, but an existing story has its own dramaturgical and theatrical logic. Therefore, recycling the characters and the conflicts has its limits. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you happy holidays.
Thank you, Timea, for a very inspiring presentation. And now I immediately open the first round of questions and comments for our three first speakers. Are there some immediate comments and questions? If not, I would like to start to give a good example as the host of the event. I would have a question for you, Michaela. In your presentation of the different aspects of a project of a sustainable theater, you mentioned at least 2 times an important aspect, which is dramaturgy. So I would like to see from your perspective, what would be the ecological sustainable dramaturgy? Because this is, I think, one of the main issues, main questions, problems, so to say, when discussing sustainable theater. We have the notion of eco-dramaturgy. I will refer in my presentation, which is, of course, the last one today, to the notion of eco-dramaturgy. Although I have to admit that I am a beginner in exploring this field, and I would hardly know how to explain the notion of eco-dramaturgy, because there is a lot of wondering about this notion. So what would be the ecological dramaturgical aspect of sustainable theater?
I'm sorry, Ivan, could you repeat that question again or explain it a little bit different, because for one moment you froze, so I'm not sure I heard.
Okay, sorry.
So
when explaining your project of the sustainable theater and how you conceived it, you mentioned few aspects, and one of the aspects was, and you stressed that it is very important, is the dramaturgical aspect.
Okay.
So what would be the dramaturgical aspect of ecologically sustainable theater?
Well, I'm not sure if this will be sufficient, but like it is dramaturgy which takes the subjects of ecology and sustainability into the role. Like it's you know, in a theater, like you can explore this topic on the way in the field of a production, so how it's made, the different processes, the materials, what is done and how, or the art itself can be about the subject. So So in this case,
sorry for interrupting you to start the kind of discussion. I will present in my paper a project by Katie Mitchell, a famous British director who is an expert in eco theater, very interested in ecologically sustainable theater. And she was also wondering what would be ecologically aware or conscious dramaturgy or playwriting, to be more precise. Because what's the problem in theater regarding, in dramaturgy, in playwriting regarding ecological sustainability? That, I mean, classical drama is so anthropocentric concept. You have conflict between two humans or two group of humans, and how to avoid this anthropocentric concept in developing new ecologically aware playwriting. I think this is one of crucial dilemmas that we have here.
It is true. Also, sometimes we just need to open up more to what we are seeing and what we already know. Shakespeare has sustainability and ecology in his dramas. Henrik Ibsen, the classic.
And Chekhov with all his trees in cherry orchard and outside of the cherry orchard.
It is the thing, like when we talk about sustainable theater and like, for example, mapping, for example, practically now about the map in Czech. The theater sometimes like really ask if they actually have to have sustainable dramaturgy or ecological dramaturgy because they kind of cannot imagine what is underneath it. And then like we have to talk, well, like for many times, like you already have it on your repertoire, you're just not talking about it in this way because you've never explored it from this point of view. So sometimes it's just looking and like opening up the point of view and or bring completely straightforward plays about the topic. But sustainable theater doesn't really have to have ecological dramaturgy. There are many.
That's true. But so, I'm just wondering about the eco-dramaturgy.
Yeah. So
yeah, but it's very interesting because you mentioned a few authors and plays authors in which plays we could find some ecological topics or topics regarding the nation, the condition, the general condition of nature. But I'm still referring to Katie Mitchell. What she sees, and I agree completely with her, is that to mention or to talk or to address certain issues, ecological issues, doesn't mean at the same time that we are, avoiding an anthropocentric point of view. Katie Mitchell wanted, and if I'm right, she has already made it a staging of cherry orchard from the perspective of the cherry orchard itself, from the cherries. But this is also an issue how, so this is a human projection into the perspective of trees. So I think it's very, very difficult for dramaturgy to avoid, to skip from the human perspective. But well,
the question is if it has to, because ecology is actually the science about the relationship between the organism and the environment. So why should we take out the organism? Then we will not talk about the ecology, because like it's about the relationship. So we don't need to take the anthropocentric view out of it. I think we just need to broaden our view and look at the things from the different point of views.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Michaela. Some other questions? Susanna, would you like to ask something? Yeah, and Sarah.
Sorry, Sarah. I was
successful in animating the discussion. I'm glad. Susanna, you are the first.
Sorry, I just want to add one point of view possibly extreme aspect of ecological dramaturgy was presented during our conference in October by Ivan Buraj, who is the head of Divadlo in Brno, and he declared the season of degrowth, and there will be no new shows, no premieres during the whole next season, apart from those that were already staged and rehearsed during the pandemic lockdowns. And their idea is to put quality instead of quantity, and to to go deeper and to make unexpected connections between all sorts of experiences, to make a use of repertoire that they already have. So just this.
Although this would be more like eco-programming or eco-curating than eco-dramaturgy. I mean, dramaturgy in the sense of artistic planning of a theater season. That's for sure fitting
Susanna, thank you for mentioning this, because during our 2020 endeavors of the sustainability, we actually, and recently we had a discussion about it, and it will be a topic for next year for us to actually talk about overproduction, and like in regards, like when pandemic came, everything kind of slowed down in a sense, and then we hope it will stay afterwards as well, and the opposite happened, and now everyone is trying to kind of rush to do all the things they couldn't do and new things. And it's a huge overproduction, which is actually harming the theater and the people in the theater audience and the protagonists. So Theater Institute definitely wants to have several talks and some research on the overproduction and how to do it. Also from the aspect that some theaters had to actually produce or rehearse plays even if when they knew they will never be premiered because they were tied to grant system. So all of this will come in the next year in our activities. So thank you,
Michaela. Savas, you raised the hand.
Yeah, yes, I wasn't planning to make this comment, but listening to what you were saying about ecology and dramaturgy, I think there's a whole debate around this issue, ecology as metaphor and ecology as practice. And what you're saying, Ivan, is the latest trend in ecology, eco-theater, that is no longer metaphors are enough. I mean, the theater has to go out and confront nature and be part of nature, and so that it disentangles itself from this anthropocentric, metaphorical thing. Anyway, just as a footnote to what to your interesting talk. Just a general question for Won Lee. Is that right? My pronunciation?
Yes.
Won Lee. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And Tim Mayer. Just wondering, because you kind of brought forward this dialogue between a past text, whether that past text is a building or a text, and I'm wondering to what extent awareness of this past text on behalf of the spectator affects the appreciation of the new version. In other words, what about spectators who are unaware of this past text? Do they kind of miss the play? And if they miss the play, does that mean that the play caters to a particular group of people? So how necessary, since once we are talking about recycling, we are talking about multiple texts, that's a fact. And then if you are not aware of this multiplicity, you shouldn't see this work, any work, or does it take away from the pleasure and appreciation, evaluation of these works? And what about the critic? So this is an issue that it always buzzes in my head when I go to cultures that play around with this idea, but I'm not aware of the history of the subtext, the other text. So, and since you both brought to my attention texts that I'm not aware of, and this dialogue, one Hungarian and the other one Korean. And so I open up the question to all speakers, because it does not only relate to your presentations, but it's a general comment or whatever question that.
Okay, Savas, just a very technical brief question, because we are running out of time.
Okay.
So there are two possibilities. Either you will ask this as a concrete question to our previous speakers, Timea and Hua-Won, or we will leave it for the final discussion for all of us.
I guess at the end. We better save time.
So we will save time now, and we will remember this question and raise it once again at the end of the conference. Same with the question that was first raised in Michaela's comment about the overwork, and we have a comment by Jeffrey that it's very much a part of the conversation here in the United States. So obviously these are two general questions which are raising up from this first part of the discussion, and we will keep them for the final part of the discussion. And now we continue. We'd continue with presentations. So to be back on the program, here I am. So now it's time to listen to our dear colleague from Latvian section of the International Association of Theatre Critics, who works in the Latvian Academy of Music, Lama Melena Bartkeviča. And the title of Lauma's presentation is Recycling Collective Memory on Theatre Stage, KGB informants and agents in contemporary Latvian theatre. This is a very intriguing topic for sure. So let's listen to KGB and recycling issues.
Hello, am I heard well?
Perfectly. We hear you
perfectly. I actually had several comments regarding the eco-critical perspectives, but since my presentation was next one, so we postponed this after the whole presentation cycle. I will tackle today a different kind of recycling, or I was thinking during the time of Juan Lee whether probably it is upcycling, but it is also left for the discussion. So I will tell about two directors and two directing strategies regarding this sensitive question. The history of KGB or Cheka is still a quite hot topic in Latvian society due to the fact that in 2019, the part of the archive of KGB has been made public, initiating the process of lustration of the informants. The fact that former informants and agents are still among the politicians and well-known people today in the society is reflected in several artworks in Latvia and Baltic states. Stage directors Alvis Hermans and Walter Seals demonstrate two different approaches to the topic in their recent productions. Actually, only 30 years after regaining the independence, Latvians just started dealing with the collective memory of the 80s and 1990s. As until very recent times, we still used to refer to the Second World War in terms of historical tragedies and traumas in literature and theater. In 2019, in New Riga Theatre, Alvis Hermans made a production, History Research Commission, compiling and fictionalizing different stories from archived documents and dossiers related to the so-called collaboration, and thus uncovering the ambiguous problematics of the topic in today's society. This example of devised theatre and grotesque and humor in form represents the increasing role of social dimension of the performing arts on Latvian stages. In 2021, in Latvian National Theatre, Walter Seals stages a dramatization of Estonian novel, The Death of the Perfect Sentence by Rein Raud, that covers the transition period of the mid-80s to the restoration of independence of the Baltic states in the 1999. and related to the historical fact of smuggling title pages of the KGB agent dossiers from Estonia to Finland. Meanwhile, the presence of Czech informants among the activists of independence movement uncovers the complicated insecurity of the time, where, and I quote here the writer, where no one could trust another, but at the same time, the trust was the only convertible value. In both cases, one can observe certain distancing or alienation that helps to deal with this sensitive collective memory issue. My idea today is to compare the methods of the recycling collective memory of both stage directors and messages their productions send to the audiences, coming to the discussion of theater as collective therapy. Here we have to also think about the pandemic that marked the post-truth as phenomenon and discourse existing in real time. The breakthrough of the notorious virus COVID-19 and the following media speculations and reactions of the society all over the world confirm the vulnerability of the notion truth today. The interaction between theater and post-truth is still a relatively new field of research. However, a number of productions commenting the social processes, such as verbatim theater, documentary or quasi-documentary productions, make post-truth present in the context of performing arts, not necessarily in negative connotation, but more as a term of status quo. And here I refer to American scholar Ralph Case, who reflects on post-truth in the work The Post-Truth Era, Dishonesty and Deception in Contemporary Life. And maybe the quote you're seeing now on your screens gives at least one of the possible answers why it took 30 years of Latvian theater and filmmakers, cultural researchers and writers to start reflection on so-called third revival that occurred in parallel with the collapse of Soviet Union. Sorry, just a second. In History Research Commission, the production of 5.5 hours, Aldis Hermans reacts to the opening of check bags, and particularly the card catalog of the persons who have been registered as KGB informants. It has to be mentioned that, in contradistinction to many post-Soviet countries in Europe, in Latvia, the so-called bags have not been made public earlier because the parliament considered that it would endanger the independent status of the country, because many people from an intellectual elite and politicians would be found there for different reasons. The question is still not clear whether the catalog is a real list of informants or a part of some disinformation campaign by Soviet authorities. Anyway, after the catalog was made public, Latvians found several prime ministers, ministers of foreign affairs, chief of justice of the Supreme Court, leaders of Catholic and Orthodox Church, 3 post-independence rectors of the largest national universities, famous filmmakers, writers, poets, and other persons of formal and non-formal social impact in today's Latvia. As for check bags in Latvian society, it is not the problem of lost interest mentioned by Ralph Case, but the credibility of the contents regarding the degree of involvement of the catalogued persons in collaboration with KGB. Aldis Hermans brings in spotlight a tragicomic attempts to sort out the issue by a History Research Commission who play episodes found during the reading of files. The stage director is aware of current post-truth circumstances, therefore he builds the production similarly to a Saturday night show, approaching rather sensitive issue in jokes or grotesque and making audience laugh, mostly. The performance is structured in 47 episodes or stories, in 3 acts of different individuals facing KGB curators who recruit them as informants and their collaboration. The monologues of KGB agents, you can see like one of them on the right picture. Their eyes are covered with black cardboard glasses for anonymity. And also there's an episode of a fictional historian's lecture in 5 parts on secret history of Riga, where the city is divided by a wall in western and eastern parts, like Berlin during the Cold War. And this is kind of invented coexistence of 2 parallel worlds within the same city. The text of performance is a compilation by actors themselves. However, the lectures of the so-called historian is direct presentation of total falsification of history, leaving the decision to believe or not to the audience members. As for the wall, there was an interesting situation I overheard during the intermission that one person asked another, are you really aware that there was such a wall in Riga? Of course, there was no wall. It was a clear fictionalization and referring to the Berlin Wall. So making randomly selected facts, mixing them with totally invented events, Hermans achieves the confusion typical for a post-truth society of today. While keeping in mind the ideologically adapted history of Soviet times, the actor and stage director choose not to mock it directly, but to show that it is rather hard to distinguish the lies or fake history if neatly presented using kind of relevant documents such as photographs, maps, etc. The lecture of the historian, as well as the monologues of the curators, match many modalities of lie mentioned by Ralph Case in the context of post-truth era, such as parallel truth, truth light, or misrepresentation, selective disclosure, etc. The fear that accompanies the individuals when approached by curators using soft power such as mask threat, emotional pressing, or pretended friendship is mostly shown in a comic way. For instance, there is an episode where an alcoholic engineer of a factory confesses to a teapot as if there was a phone link to a KGB office, that yesterday he got drunk and yelled loudly, wishing that all the communists would be hung or sent back to their Rodina. Like, there are many kind of these comic episodes played. Or for instance, on the left, the picture illustrates a Catholic priest and the grandpa walking in this commission office. And the grandpa wants to confess his sins, but cannot remember anything anymore. All he remembers that he was an informer, a rat, he calls himself. And nevertheless, he cannot recall what was his nickname or who were the people he betrayed. He needs forgiveness, but he does not remember what is there to forgive. And the vicious circle of absurdity keeps rolling all the show, and actually offers many laugh as collective therapy, avoiding the serious part of the dissidents and people who actually suffered from Soviet repression, being imprisoned and physically and morally destroyed until the 1990s. The ease, the creative team skipped the dissidents, portraying them as slightly limited and narrow-minded persons, is almost arrogant. Now to the second, Walter Seals, in his turn. There is a slight interesting generational gap between the two directors, about 30 years, as you might have seen before. So it is also interesting how they treat the problem. Walter is particularly interested in national history and has already several productions related to the history of the 90s, 80s, 90s. He mixes political theater with psychological one, mostly portraying the people in so-called border situations under certain ideological or socio-historical conditions. And therefore, his approach tries to reveal the ambiguous character of the people in given circumstances and their role in historical processes with a retrospective view, without aiming to classify, justify, or evaluate the outcomes. His strategy in last two productions, the listening is audio production where you can be like a KGB agent listening to different phone lines to people. Also a very interesting one, but I'm not concentrating on that. But in the Finlandization and the Death of the Perfect Sentence, what he actually does is he refers to Finland and Estonia with clear hint that with a few differences, these stories apply clearly also to Latvia. This is easier if these are politicians, Czechists, collaborators, or national activists of the neighboring country, thus avoiding pointing at any specific and in most cases still living and socially active personalities among us. The Death of the Perfect Sentence is a novel of Estonian writer Rein Ronald and was dramatized to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the barricade in the Baltic countries of 1991. The premiere actually was postponed from the pandemic time to like barely 2 weeks ago. This is a really fresh example. There are a few images also. So it is a story about Estonian students who participate in the revival, about KGB intertwining with independence movement and ambiguous feelings of the involved persons who are heroes and traitors simultaneously, depending on ideological perspective. How do you interpret the case? The production uses photographs of Estonian song festival patriotic songs of the time and the chronicle of revival events, which is printed in the booklet. It is like actual chronicle of the events from 1988 to 1999. The story the story is told by the story is told by a storyteller, like a third person, who sometimes corrects himself with a sentence which is very notable one. Actually, it wasn't that simple. And the scene is replayed with more details of what was said before, done, or what the context was. And indeed, among the protagonists, there is a Russian teacher who works at the KGB and smuggles the pictures of agents possessed by independence movement. There is art student and Russian businessman who helps in the chain to get the films over the Finnish border. There are Estonian Czechist who warns his son in the independence movement that the teacher was captured. And there are two-faced collaborators among young Estonians sent to Sweden, etc. The teeny red line between trust and treachery is seen on every step in every relationship. At the end of the day, the major of KGB, who is the axis of evil in the production, ends up printed on the election booklet as a candidate for the Minister of Interior 10 years later. Actually, it isn't that simple in all Eastern and Central European countries, isn't it? Depending on which generation we belong to, we still have different experiences. As for the 1990s, the main discourse in the society today is to recall the unity of nation resisting against falling Soviet regime and not the controversies around it. These two theater productions tackle this sensitive question, calling to memory recycling. In History Research Commission, the post-truth is consciously or unconsciously accepted as a frame, and checkbacks are viewed as an issue without option to find any fact-based, objective, authentic truth, since it has been deformed from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the death of the perfect sentence is demonstrates, as the notable sentence says, "Oh, this was not that simple." And through a story about the neighbor, the controversies of the time are accepted, putting individual border situations in focus. This chapter in Society and Art cannot end with conclusions, as we have just started to sort out the issue in our collective memory. And I look forward for the discussion, since it's still work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now we go to the next one, which is a presentation by a theater artist this time, not a critic or a scholar or a producer, a theater director from Slovakia, Mila Dromovic, who will present us her project, Cosmopol, Identity Recycling. So Mila, please.
Yes, good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm pleased to be part of such an interesting conference concerning upcycling in performing arts. And I'm glad to talk about and introduce our project Cosmopol. Together with my partner in crime, co-director Klara Jakubová, we have prepared a presentation that will help you imagine the process of production, which was actually based on recycling processes. So now I'm going to try to share the screen. Okay. Okay, so Cosmopol is an immersive theater project made in Banská Štiavnica in 2019. Its main point was to refresh the memories of the place and also the historic events of 20th century, directly connected with the town. It connects the little history of town with the big history of our European region. During 1 year, we have written 150-page long script of a fictional documentary in form of polydrama. And at the end, we came up with a 3 hours long immersive multimedia installation with 11 stage sets, where the story takes place on parallel scenes simultaneously. On the slide, you can see a wedding picture that is made at the start of the play. Already here, the spectator becomes a wedding guest and part of the Cosmopol story at the same time. Get you in picture, Banská Štiavnica has for many centuries been a famous mining city with a multicultural background and rich history. But during the 20th century, the town starts to lose its importance. Mines are slowly closing. And after World War II and long communist period, the cosmopolitan disappears and the inhabitants are losing their contact with what once upon a time was a essence of this town. That's why our main point was to renovate the identity of nowadays inhabitants of the town who are losing connection with their town, elite, history, and are lost themselves in time and space without roots to connect to. And you can see their frustration. We wanted to highlight an opportunity for people to rejoin and identify themselves with their history through stories of their fathers, their bravery, and also failures. We have created a life of a fictional Satmari family, their friends, neighbors, and enemies. We refer to true stories of inhabitants that we collected in the form of oral history. We touch forgotten traumas of the town and talk about them openly. A spectator becomes part of the story and he can choose between parallel scene sets and make his own version of a story. The whole creative process was connected with various forms of upcycling, first in stories, then plays, then materials and items as well. We have started with historical research and read tons of books. We have read loads of old newspapers and magazines, periodic prints. But the main source of our story upcycling were the interviews with the elderly. They told us their life stories, which later became the building stones of our polydrama. Oral history research was conducted by our fellow ethnologist, Verona Hajdučíková. We made a decision that we won't be working with a concrete story of one person. Instead, we rebuild the script by connecting little pieces from multiple stories of destinies that we heard. So basically, we started recycling stories to create a whole new story that carries traces of many of the original stories. We have chosen an old burgher's house that exactly fitted our needs. This house was reconstructed 3 years ago by Marek Pavlik, and today you can find the cultural center Eleusina based here. As you can see on the pictures, there are phases of before, after, and at the end of the reconstruction. The site itself was therefore reconstructed or even recycled site. We have created 11 stage sets inside of the house and in the garden. Each of the stages has its own scenography, where we try to be as authentic as possible and use real features, costumes, and props suitable for the time period. To create the scenes, we searched in archives, historical motion pictures, videos, and photos. We wanted to be historically correct and create a truly authentic environment to make the spectators' experience as deep as possible. We decided to build a scene from real historical objects and materials. So where did we start to gain small and big scenography items and props? Of course, first place were our own attics, since we live in this town in old houses. It was very logical to start here. And then we moved to our families and friends and many other nice people's attics. And that's how we got a lot of personal items and costumes. We also used a social network, mainly the Facebook community. We bought some items on the internet or web pages focused on antiquarian subjects. Then, for example, we asked for help from a burial service company since one of the main characters of Cosmopol owns a burial service. We also borrowed hundreds of books from Antiquariat, which is based in Štiavnica. And we also use secondhand shops and flea markets. We acquired many items that were forgotten in time and space and gave them a second chance in our performance. Mainly it was big furniture, books, photos, curtain, textile, costumes, specific items for Jewish shop, items for dentistry, chemical glass, and also valuables and written documents. Many of the items we got were in a horrible state, and there was a need to restore them. We managed to repair plenty of furniture, old lights, books, suitcases, skis, but also photographs. We wanted everything to be functional so that it looked exactly as it did in the past. Spectator gets to see the items from very near. Items can be touched and checked by spectator. Therefore, it was important for us that these items work a bit as a time machine. And in this case, it was not just about recycling, but also about renovation. Main character of our play is a dentist. Therefore, we had to get all the features for his practice. The challenge was to find the items which would fit into first half of the 20th century. We managed to get a functional dental manual drill from a grandson whose grandpa used it in his practice in Prague in the 1930s. Then also original dentist chair from 20s, and then chemical glass jars, dentist tools. We also upcycled an old advertisement that we found in old newspaper and used it at our dentist practice. Let's take a look at the story of this dental chair. We found the chair on the internet. The seller stated it as fully renovated. The real story was that we got renovated pieces of an old dentist chair, approximately 20 boxes and smaller boxes full of pieces, and one guide, approximately 70 pages of faded away instructions containing pictures of items, but it was not fitting together in reality. So we became a Cinderella team of technical staff, art directors and actors, and it took us 6 weeks to put the chair together. I'm sure this chair no longer hoped that someone would put it together, but we managed eventually and return it to its lost glory. Another important part of recycling were the costumes, which we didn't design and do as usual in theater. Instead, we used real historical dresses. For example, a lace dress after the art director's grandma from 1930s. We have received original uniform of a Russian soldier and also the uniform of gardist as gift. There was a need to fix many of the dresses, but either way, they authentically helped our actors to fall into their roles. Other important props used are real books and prints used by actors and available to spectator to touch and look at. For example, magazines, letters, communist ID books, and so on. Separate part was photo material. We used historical photos, but for our needs, we had to create our own photos that looked like historical ones. This was created mainly for the stage set for the character of the son of the dentist, whose room is actually a historical photo atelier, as it is his hobby. Our Cosmopol is functioning as a time machine with a cathedral effect onto the spectator. While the stories themselves were traumatic for those who lived them, their function is moved, and in our upcycled play, elevated to bring catharsis. We think that the world of Cosmopol is functioning because of the whole upcycling process. Finally, we dare to say that we have renovated the identity of one city and its inhabitants by recycling their stories, places, and things. When we talk about recycling in the performing arts, we also certainly mean the environmental dimension. We saved the environment by creating the whole stage and costumes from recycled materials. We also saved energy as the lighting design did not use theatrical lighting at all. We used real daylight and ordinary lamps were lit in the interiors. Another important environmental input is that Cosmopol was established as a local theater in a small town. We used local resources, themes, stories, and recycled scenography, but we also used local human resources. Many local people have selflessly helped us with the creation process. We also ourselves had several functions in the process. To be honest, when we were preparing the project, we did not fully realize the fact that the creative process and the performance itself is based on recycling and that we are environmentally friendly. We must admit that this was not explicitly our intention, but we are very happy that it happened naturally, and we are sure that we will consciously continue to do so in the future.
Thank you, Mila. Did you finish? Sorry.
No. 2 more things, if it's okay.
Yeah, and 2 more minutes, if it is okay.
Okay, yeah. So we are talking now about the team behind. So we have 10 professional actors, 2 talented musicians, 2 kid talents, 2 art directors, 1 ethnologist, and 9 irreplaceable helpers taking care of the production, scenes, lights, masks, costumes, and requisites. And at the very end, I would like, okay, how can I move this? I would like to get, oh, how can I get there? Because I wanted to put the trailer on, but I cannot get rid of the panel up there. I'm sorry, 1 second. If it's okay, I really would like
1 second is always okay.
Yeah.
Try to make a new sharing. Just
yes,
stop sharing and
I'm trying to do it. 1 second. It worked when I was, okay, let's try like this. I'll be right back. Okay. Yes. Now.
Is it working?
Yes, it should be working. Hopefully.
It seems it works.
Yeah, but it just somehow, yes. Oh no. I'm sorry. Just, it really worked when I tried, but now it doesn't seem to be working.
You can maybe send us the link in chat room, and that's how we can watch it later.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's really
no.
Something is wrong, maybe with the internet connection now. I don't know.
These things happen all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a shame. Yeah.
Yeah, you can share it in the chat room later, or maybe send us by email. We would gladly see it. Yeah, do finish, please.
It's actually, that's the end, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you, Mila. We are continuing now with the presentation that some of us have been looking forward since long ago by our colleague Rudolf Leszka. The title of the presentation is Applying Idea Expression Dichotomy on Stage Productions. And colleague Rudolf Leszka is an opera and theater critic, but first of all, he's an author in copyright scholar. And he is senior assistant professor in copyright and media law at the University of Administration and Finance in Prague, Czech Republic. So I think this would be a very interesting, as somebody mentioned at the very beginning, the copyright issues are very important for the idea of, for the concept of recycling in performing arts. So, are you with us? We don't see you.
Hello, Ivan.
You are here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, my apologies, because when I tried to load the presentation, it really froze my computer. So I had to switch to my cell phone, and I hope you hear me well.
Yeah, we do. And
you will be deprived of my image and the presentation, but I will send you the links at least in the chat. In this way, I'm sorry for that. In the meantime, maybe it will sort of start again on the computer. If so, I will switch that. And I will try to be brief, because I see that we are over the time. But as you have mentioned, I will talk about the rather different issues related to the notion of recycling. And indeed, the word copyright was mentioned in the very first contribution, and it's right that the copyright issues are crucial if we talk about recyclation in art, and about the way how to remake things in art and culture. And the other important word which was mentioned at the beginning was the term of originality. So the originality is a central expression of the copyright law, and that's something I'll talk about today. First of all, copyright is still based on the Western understanding of art, which is a bit of a romantic understanding of the art. It's it's from the early 1800s, and it's based on the central figure of the author who comes with something original. And although it might be questioned, it remains so, I believe, for quite a long time still. So even if there is, technically speaking, nothing original, for the copyright lawyer, if it should be protected, it must be original in the legal term. In the if we speak legally. But we must differ between the originality of the ideas and the originality of the expression. That means of how it is made actually on the stage, or how it is written. First of all, I will talk basically about two issues. The one is the copyrightability of the stage productions as such, and the other one is this idea expression dichotomy issue. And I'm glad that this is organized by our Slovak Institute and the Slovak chapter of the association, because Slovakia is one of the few countries in the world which has expressly in its statute recognized the authorship of the stage director to his or her stage production, which means that under the Slovak copyright law, the stage director is considered to be an author of the stage production. And there are very few other countries like this. One of them, for instance, Portugal in Europe, and then some more distant countries. I would like to draw your attention to a study which has been recently conducted by the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, on the copyrightability of stage directions, well, the link is in the chat, and if you scroll down at the website, you will find this study, and that was a global study which looked on the copyright law of some of the countries, and it shows in which countries the stage directors are protected as the authors, either via the Copyright Act or through the case law of the courts, which have developed a doctrine of the copyrightability of stage directors. That's a case of Germany, for instance. There was a very spectacular case of a dispute between the director Peter Konvičný and the Dresden Opera House, where the Dresden impresario made some cuts to his production to make it more to make it more appealable to the bourgeois audience for the Sylvester night, for the end of the year of the operetta Čardáš Fürstin. And Konvičný didn't like this, obviously, and he sued, and he claimed his moral rights as the creator of that production, and he wanted to reintroduce the sort of shocking scenes which involved the First World War trenches and some dead corpses and so on in the middle of this operetta. So there was a case where at the end the court said, well, this is actually a work of authorship. That's an original work of authorship, and no matter that we don't have it mentioned expressly in the statute, that it's not a literature, it's not literature, it's not a film, it's not a visual art, but it's still it still can be protected because and there's no limitation as to what kind of art must be or can be protected. There are similar cases all around the world, including the US. We had an American colleague speaking here, and I don't want to dig into this issue, but I just wanted to mention this, that it is still contested. In countries which do not accept the authorship of the stage director, like for instance the Czech Republic, where I'm living currently, they often consider the stage directors as a performing artist, something like actors who deliver the literary work. So they protect the stage directors on this with this philosophy that from the theatrical point of view, a very old-fashioned philosophy that the director is simply delivering the work of literature on the stage, and he's at the best can influence some shape of it, but that he's not creating or adding something new to that piece of literature. So we all know this is a very untimely attitude to theater, but this is what, for instance, the Czech courts have said, and what the courts in most European countries say, and that the director is a performing artist. And in some countries, even this does not apply. So they say that basically it's not the outcome of the director's activity is a rather artisan work, like if you are making pottery in an artisan shop or something like that, so that it's not really an artistic activity, that it's a routine technical activity which is not protected by any of the intellectual property laws. So that's the three different attitudes to directors, and it's interesting how big differences there are in these approaches, because for instance we don't have anything like that with the film directors, because film is obviously a global phenomenon, and then if you are making a $100 million euros film, you need to have it protected around the globe on the same basis. So there, these differences don't happen with the theater, which is much more local, of course, because it's aimed for the real life presentation. The big cultural differences are also emanated in this legal interpretation. Well, and so that's the first thing. I believe that the stage direction is simply a work of authorship. I don't have any doubts about it, because there's no difference basically between what the stage director does and what a film director does. I wrote a book about this in the Czech language, so you can't read it really, but that's an issue I deal constantly with. But once we say that the stage production is subject to copyright, the answer arises: when does it come to a copy of that outcome of the director's creative activity? So what is plagiarism on stage? And here the answer might be difficult, because the copyright lawyers, like myself, are trained to understand this on the works of literature, right? So you basically can say, in most cases, when a text was copied. So either parts of the texts were copied, copy pasted to another text, or the text served only as an inspiration, but the inspiration might amount to infringement, but must not necessarily amount to an infringement if the inspiration is only in terms of the pure idea, like let's write a book about two prisoners escaping from a concentration camp, right? That's an idea, and everyone can write a book about it, or a film, or make a stage production about it. So the ideas are not protected, and this rule is known as the idea expression dichotomy in copyright. And it means that only the original way how you shape the idea and how you express the idea is protected. In its most basic form, when we talked about remakes and revivals in theater, there is no problem with applying copyright law, because of course, if it's a one-to-one copy, there's no problem, right? So you basically license the original production to someone who makes a remake or a revival, and you should have a consent of the original stage director, at least in those countries which protect at least somehow the stage directors. But what if you are taking only some elements from the original production and you are including them in your newer production? So that's when the problem arises. And I bet you have encountered the situation where you have thought to yourself, well, I have seen this somewhere, or you actually knew that the local director was making something which pretty much resembles a famous production you have seen elsewhere, or a year or 2 or 3 years before. So that's the challenge for the copyright lawyer to say, was it only idea which was taken, like the idea of staging Hamlet in an underground garage, or is it already the original way how it was staged which was taken? And I'm not going to decide this on right now, but I just wanted to say that the way how the lawyer would approach this is different from a way how the critic would approach it, because for the art critique, even the taking of the idea might be derogatory somehow, you know, like we have seen the Hamlet in the underground garage a year before, and now you are basically copying this idea. But for a lawyer, this must not necessarily mean that it's a plagiarism if they do it in the newer production in their own way. And the last point I wanted to make is a specific problem of the performance or art performance, you know, when which is on the border case between theater and art or artwork, where it resembles the conceptual artwork, and where the copyright law has a problem with the conceptual art, because there it's the idea which is emanating itself through for instance, through an object, which is an objet trouvé or something like that, and there the originality of the expression is really hidden or merged with the idea itself. So that's even another level of the problem. If we say that the stage direction is copyrightable or is protected by the copyright, so what should we do with the performance art then? You know, if the performer like Marina Abramovich sits in an art gallery and she's just sitting there, is that what she's doing, you know, but protected by law, by copyright law? Well, perhaps not, because it would mean that she has a monopoly to sitting on in a gallery. But these are the you know, the difficult issues which then would arise. And for those who are interested, I'm also copying to you to the chat and a link to an English study I wrote about the performance art, because then there it's quite clearly shown like what problems I'm talking about and how. So, well, thank you for your attention, and if you will have any questions or comments, I'm glad to talk this over.
Thank you, Rudolf, for this very, very interesting presentation, which raises, at least from my perspective, a lot of questions. I hope we will have time for questions. Okay, we are running a bit out of time, but if we add like some 15 to 20 additional minutes to our conference, if we finishes at 5:15, I think that we will have enough time for the last presentation and for the discussion. I hope that the last presenter will be how to say, quick enough to finish on time his presentation, and the last presenter is myself, so I will really try not to be longer than 15 minutes. The title of my presentation, as it is stressed in the program, is Recycling Theatre and Festivals, an answer to travel restrictions introduced by pandemic and or ecological awareness. I have to say at the very beginning that my perspective is one of a festival curator, because when presenting myself at the beginning, I didn't mention that I am the artistic director of Belgrade International Theatre Festival. And what I realized in 2 last years during the pandemics of coronaviruses is that a new theatrical form is emerging. I mean, it's not brand new, maybe it's recycled, but it becomes very present in international theater market, so on the international theater market, so to say. These are performances that I call franchise performances, or in the context of our conference, we can call them recycled pieces or recycled shows, although both recycling and franchise, both notions have this negative meaning, which is not my intention at all, because I think that these kind of performances that I would like to talk about today are a very impressive, strong, powerful answer to a phenomenon that was imposed both by the restriction introduced, travel restriction introduced by the global pandemic, and on the other hand, ecological awareness. As we know, a lot of artists, theater makers stopped traveling because air traffic is seen as and recognized as one of the main sources of air pollution. So even before COVID, even before the pandemic of COVID-19, there was this kind of approach. So what are the franchise performances or recycling pieces? These are, in very few words, before I start talking or reading, to be as quick as possible, about two examples that I would like to share with you. What are these kind of recycled pieces or franchise performances? These are performances which do not travel outside of the places for which they were made. So they don't go on tour, they do not take part in international theater festivals. But I mean, it's not completely true. The performers, the artists do not travel. The set design is not transported from one place to another, but there is something that is very essential for these productions, which is a general script or stage text of the performance, which includes not only artistic instructions and verbal texts that are supposed to be said on the stage, but technical requirements, choreographical concept, musical score, everything is written as a script, and this script travels. If the script needs to travel, it's enough to make one single movement on your laptop and it goes from one place to another. So on the ground, in the local context, this script is supposed to be recycled or reenacted by local performers. So you would not see the exactly the same show as it was made in Lausanne, for example, or Dresden, because I will speak about shows that were made for the first time in those two cities, but very similar productions with local performance and local material that is found on the spot itself, but upon a very precise, detailed script, which, to repeat once again, includes all the artistic instructions, but at the same time, all the productional elements of production and technical requirements. So my first example is a project with a very significant title, Sustainable Theatre, which was launched by two very well-known theatre makers, English theatre director Katie Mitchell and French choreographer Jérôme Bell. When I was interested for this project at the first time, it still didn't exist. It was in spring this year, and the first part of the project, Katie Mitchell's performance, was produced and premiered only in September in Teatro VD Lausanne. But already in spring, one could listen to Katie Mitchell's interview, which was given for the website of Teatro VD Lausanne, where she already developed the basic ideas of this project. So this presentation of mine will combine these basic ideas Katie Mitchell had at the very beginning with the results she achieved in the final in the work itself. The main premise of this project's sustainability is that it excludes any type of travel. The authors neither traveled over the period of the initial preparations, nor did they move and were physically present in Lausanne during rehearsals. The two of them, Mitchell and Jérôme Bell, didn't plan to leave their cities, but to hold the online rehearsals with the performance in Lausanne. The reasons for this approach are not only the difficulties caused by the quarantine, self-isolation, and other anti-pandemic measures, but the fact that air traffic is one of the biggest generators of harmful gases emissions. It was actually their ecological consciousness, the fact that both of them refused to fly by planes for the same reason, what linked Katie Mitchell and Jérôme Bell to work on this project. The restrictions does not relate to the preparation of the project only, but also to the performance itself. It will not be played out of the theater where it is produced. But as I have already said, it means that performers and technical equipment, technical material won't travel. Partners from other towns who want to present this performance will work with local performance and local director on the base of the general script, and they will be free to introduce some local motifs in the show. An important, if not the crucial, aesthetic parameter is this very script, which is not only a classical spoken text, let's call it a play, but it also includes, as I have already mentioned, stage directions regarding choreography, for example, and all technical requirements. The main technical requirement belongs to the concept of ecological sustainability as well, since it concerns reduced use of electricity. In other words, performance played out of Teatro VD will never represent new staging of the same dramatic text, but a reenactment of the same detailed stage script or stage text. Still, this project does not represent an actual franchise since, as it is already mentioned, local artists are not only allowed but also encouraged to include some local motifs related to the topic of the performance. Besides artists, others can also contribute to the local character of the show, as it is the case with the original concept made in Lausanne. Scientists in various disciplines linked to ecological issues as well as environmental activists. And what is the concrete topic, what Katie Mitchell thought of at the beginning? Judging from the interview on the website of VD, the topic was supposed to correspond to the described form of production. It was planned its focus to be on ecology, tackling the issues of global climate changes, air pollution, etc. The third important aspect, theater form itself, was also supposed to be in line with other aspects, to be suitable for the concept of ecologically self-aware theater. However, this third aspect, theater form, was a challenge from the very beginning. As stated by Mitchell, the most appropriate theater mode would be a piece on how climate changes influence humans, but it supports, from her point of view, anthropocentrism, which should be avoided when we advocate for the renewal of ecological balance. So what was finally the story that Katie Mitchell has chosen finally? So we are now coming to the performance that was made and presented in September this year in VD Lausanne. The verbal text of her all-encompassing stage text was a monologue entitled A Play for the Living in a Time of Extinction, written by Miranda Rose Hall. Although this is a monologue of a human being performed on stage by a human being, this text succeeds, at least in a certain degree, to overpass anthropocentrism and thus reaches the level of eco-dramaturgy. First of all, the content of the text is a direct critique of anthropocentrism, of the major role and responsibility that our species, Homo sapiens, has in how Rose Hall call it, the actual sixth mass extinction in the history of Earth. The central topic of the plays is precisely the history of mass extinction on Earth, those processes in which disappeared the entire animal species and or vegetations. The crucial difference is that all these 5 previous mass extinctions in history of the Earth were caused by geological reasons. Only the 6th one, which lasts for an insignificantly short period of time, that started 200 years ago, was caused by one of the animal species, Homo sapiens. We were told in the show that in this very short period of time, which is a single second in the history of Earth, some 300,000 species extincted. An especially touching moment in the show is the scene in which the performer lists names of all the species who completely disappeared only since she was born, the performer herself, and she's 30 years old, and spectators watch the examples of all the mentioned species on a screen behind the performer. Although humans as a species are in general responsible for the actual mass extinction on Earth, Rose Hall draws a politically very important distinction. Not all races, gender, and classes have the same responsibility. Much bigger is the responsibility of those people who belong to the privileged groups, to the rich, white, and males. This is how the perspective of ecofeminism, post-colonialism, and similar discourses were introduced in the play, and thus the anthropocentric position was deconstructed, at least for a bit. And that's also the explanation of the fact that the performer, the single performer in this show, is a young woman of African origin. This fact pulls us back from the verbal text from the play to the stage text, to the stage script, this all-encompassing script with all the necessary instructions regarding artistic and producing demands of the project, the script which will be the basis of any future recycling of Mitchell's staging concept in other theaters. One of them is that the piece, one of these requirements is that the piece should be played by, I quote, female identifying performer of color and or of an ethnic minority that is relevant to your demographic, end of quote. As regarding some other elements of the project, in this case, Mitchell also gives a freedom to the local director and her collaborators to change these requirements, this particular requirement, but only if the performer would still be coming from an underrepresented community. In the final version of the stage script of Mitchell's staging of a play for the living in the time of extinction, some other elements crucial to the concept are mentioned as well. Mitchell stayed consistent to the technical requirements she introduced in the interview given in spring. First of all, those requirements that concerns reduced use of electricity. Here is the precise instruction from the script. The average wattage for the show must not exceed 150 watts. To generate the electricity, you can use bicycles, as we did in VD, or design your own system if you want or have the means to do so. End of quote. In the VD production of this script, this technical requirement becomes at the same time one of its main artistic features. The two bicycles, specially designed to produce electricity, are not hidden from the stage. Quite opposite, they are almost the only set design in the performance. Having in mind that their function is not the aesthetical one, but the technical one, to produce electricity for the show, one can easily conclude that somebody has to ride them live on stage. That's exactly the case, and this riding of bicycles is almost the only physical action on the show. One of its rare elements that goes beyond the mise-en-scène of a lecture performance or even a simple stage reading of a play. This particular scene could gain a kind of metaphorical meaning. You see humans who spend their physical energy for an hour and a half to produce electricity and thus provide both a moral and conceptual justification to the show, which tries to establish ecological sustainability in performing art. Now I will give just a few words and finish in 3 minutes about the last or one of the last projects of the famous German collective of directors, Rimini Protocol, Conference of the Absent, which we presented at the last BITEF, which is a great example of franchise performances or recycled pieces or pieces for recycling, so to say. In this show, there are no performers to travel, but neither there is a set designed to be transported. So the same thing as in Katie Mitchell's production. There is, again, a script of the staging in which the desirable look of set design is described into details, but it is also stressed that it should be found on the spot. So by local organizers of the show. So in other words, there are no humans or materials that go on per, just this detailed script, which is the basis of any recycled versions of the show. Okay, I will skip this part. So this script for a Conference of the Absent consists out of 2 main texts. Verbal text that somebody has to speak loudly on the stage, and all the instructions regarding set design, actions of performance, light and sound design, time frames, and other elements of staging. All the verbal text in this performance, and here we come to its basic ideas, are papers that were supposed to be presented at the scientific conference. The problem occurred when it happened that due to their eco-consciousness, none of the participants of the conference did come to the conference. This is of course a fictional fact. It's a precondition for the basic idea of the performance. The absent experts, participants of the conference, are represented by spectators. The audience is animated by the host of the show, which is a kind of pre-recorded voice, which invites spectators onto the stage and gives them instructions how to perform the papers which authors are not there, presentations which authors are not there. Not all characters are real scientists. Some of them are the real life expert, which is a term coined a long time ago by Rimini Protocol for the amateurs who are agents, both characters and performance, in their Rimini Protocol's documentary performances. in conference of the absent, they are common people who had different experiences with the topic of the conference and who are represented in the performance by spectators. And the topics of the conference are appropriate, even strongly and deeply interwoven with this performative dispositive of conference of the absent. The topics of the conference, of this fictional conference, are the very notions of presence and of representation. So there are a few fictional characters. A 90-year-old Israeli citizen who tells his life story. He survived the World War II only because in a crucial moment he took the identity of a German boy and continued representing him. A doctor from the Charité University Clinic in Berlin shares with us his experience and knowledge about phantom pain, a pain that comes from a body part that's no longer presented. In other words, the pain represents the part of the body that is not present anymore. A female refugee from Eastern Africa testifies that she doesn't feel like being really present while waiting on a Greek shore to get papers and enter Europe. Now I'm concluding. There are a few more stories in the script. A script, either experts' presentation or personal testimonies, that deals with the notions of presence and representation. But it is significant that none of them, at least not in a direct way, refers to theater and performing arts in general. This particular absence of notions of presence and representations in the context of theater is striking and significant because, as it is well known, presence and representation are the crucial concept when discussing theater and performing arts in general. Stage presence is seen as one of the basic qualities dispositive of any performance, regardless of its genre, cultural tradition, and historical epoch from which it comes. This is the quality that makes humans on stage live in theatrical terms. On the other hand, the notion of representation, which refers to the idea of being instead representing some reality from the outside world, drives us back to the very essence of the Western theater culture, to the Aristotelian notion of mimesis. Okay, I'm skipping and finishing now. Sorry, it happened that I was the longest one. But although presence and representation, no, this is something I will skip, and now I'm concluding. Having in mind these theoretical considerations about presence and representation in theater studies, it's really strange that the notions of absence, presence, and representation were not addressed in their theatrical meaning, in their theatrical context, in a theater work in which they are the main topics. But this is strange only from a first glance. The very idea that the missing scholars or real-life experts should be represented by spectators is a very subtle meta-comment about the importance of all these concepts in theater. It is kind of wittily subtle and intelligent acknowledging that bodily presence and exchange between performers and spectators, and in the conference of absent, these are two groups of spectators, what Erika Fischer-Lichte labels as the autopoietic feedback loop, is the main aesthetic presumption of theater and any kind of performance. Sorry, I was a bit longer. Now we move to the discussion, and 15 minutes discussion, 20 minutes maximum. Are there some immediate comments about the presentations that we have just heard? If not, we have Sava's general comment and question from the previous part of the conference. Would you like, Savas, to start the debate with repeating or reshaping your comment and question?
Yeah, basically,
or maybe adding some new elements to it.
Well, basically, it's a general comment question. Is that I'm always wondering to what extent since we are talking about, you mentioned that franchising or other recycling, or this dialogue, in other words, with the other text, how important it is to understand and evaluate the new product. I mean, even, what I experience now, and it's kind of difficult thing. There is this explosion of indigenous cultures. Everybody talks about indigenous cultures, especially in the Anglophone world, in Australia, Canada, the United States. And I'm not aware with most of them. And I have to read texts that have this dialogue with these indigenous cultures, and I feel uncomfortable in the sense that I cannot really grasp what is going on. And that was my question at the beginning, how important it is to know the original text, no matter what that is, to understand the present text. And if it is important, then my second question is, who the theater caters to what audience? An elite audience, an audience of PhDs, an audience of researchers, an audience of scholars? Who is the audience? If it presupposes a deep knowledge of the original source. That is my, take it as a comment, take it as a question, I guess. So it buzzes in my head, so it's not really a,
yeah.
Okay.
But does it refer, I mean, indigenous texts? I'm not sure whether some of
indigenous texts that are now used are the kind of recontextualized.
Yeah,
I mean, they are adapted, appropriated in order to you know, be in accord to what is going on today. So Indian texts and black texts, old black texts, and old Indian texts, and the native people's text, this kind of stuff. Yeah. Even Ivan, I'm talking about, you know, local text of any country, old text of any country that comes back to life in one form or another. Loma, for example, brought to my attention this KGB text, whatever. In other words, these elements from local culture. And I'm wondering how demanding that is for a non-native or someone who is not aware of these things to appreciate what is staged.
Yeah. Okay. Does somebody feel like commenting, answering in discussion regarding this issue? Juan, please.
Yeah, I'll be brief because he addressed that question to me at first. Well, for me, if we know that there is an original text and we are dealing with some recycled or upcycled performance now, if we know that, we can appreciate more and we can be more intrigued by the fact that there is some process going on, right? But I don't just think it's absolutely necessary to know that process to appreciate the performance at stake, because I think the producers or the artists deal with those process not just to work on the original, but they just want to reflect upon the atmosphere or the environment of the audience of his theater. Is already something responding to the audience and something to respect the audience state. So if we know the original, text, we can have some more fun, some more process to think about. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter if the once audience can enjoy it, is their play. Just what I think. But there is some word like we can see more as we know more. If we know more, we can see more things. So we cannot just please all the aspects, all the needs of all the spectators. The spectator just they enjoy as much as they can do. That's what I think. But something going on for my wandering theater troupe. There is not only some problem or something going on only for the text. We worked on the text, which was originally English novel, but also we worked on the environment, the space, and the performance skill, the genre. We worked on very many aspects of performance. So even though we don't know about the history of the text, we can just enjoy seeing, watching, everyday life transformed to something just new, something very artistic. That's what was there already, even though we don't know about the history of the text. That's what I can say. Respond to your question. Okay.
Thank you, Hwa-won. Lauma?
I was just reflecting on the topic of that. I think that is more not about text, but about certain layers of information that are intertwining in the production and different levels of perception of the audiences. And of course, somehow it depends on the degree of their readiness to perceive one or another text. Because, for instance, if you would look on certain theater productions of the, say, 1970s, for instance, where the strong presence of subtext. Today, the person who is not aware of the ideological situation of that time is not perceiving many things that seem to be hidden between the lines, right? And in terms of this historical text or as of indigenous text, like for instance, I refer also for some folkloric sources somehow brought to stage. Of course, some kind of comment is needed from the part of producers. Well, as I'm dealing with a showcase program as well here in Latvia, we also have very tough discussions about which performances should be included in the program, right? Programming of the showcase is also a problematic issue because on the one hand, we would like to show what is very typical for our country or our region. On the other hand, it is much more easier to show some kind of reinterpreted or recontextualized Shakespeare or Ibsen or Chekhov or whoever classics, right? And it is also this dilemma, whether you are ready to contribute with your background information to the foreign viewer, or you just choose some very well-known things that are just reinterpreted or recycled. So, and I don't know actually whether there's one perfect solution for that. I think that especially small nations should very much harder work on it to extrapolate their actual problematics and recontextualizing of their actual problematics, maybe seeking some similarities and common things with other neighboring countries or regions.
Okay, thank you, Lauma. Some other questions? And Zuzana, did you raise it?
Yeah. I just would like to say that we all are indigenous in a way cultures, and especially as Lauma said, small countries. Who knows our classical text? Not even our students, to be frank and open. So it's very difficult to find stories that is universally shared in this world. Maybe Cinderella. Even Cinderella has 20,000 different local versions, so we cannot agree on every aspect of the story universally. So we all are strangers to the stories that are shared. So we should accept some ignorance. We should accept that there are failings. We should accept that we do not understand everything. But I think for the theater makers the aim is to try to find something that can be shared. Just a small example of production that was produced in Košice, the second largest city in Slovakia, and presented in Nitra Festival. And we saw that, this story is so local, no one can understand this because it's about the Slovak theater directors that collaborated with Nazis or were too friendly with Nazi regime during the war, etc., etc. And suddenly Darko Lukic came to the festival and said, but look, we have the same, a very similar story of other director in our country. So you never know which small local story will be somehow important for other people. So we have to accept we are indigenous to many other cultures in the world, and we have to accept that our hope for a small hints of understanding, small moments of understanding.
Thank you, Susanna. Are there some more questions or comments? First time, second time, third time. If not, I think it was really very inspiring. I personally have few questions to other speakers, but I don't want to misuse my position here. And on the other hand, it proves me that we have just started talking about a very important issue, and that we might think of making, as this was a long-term project, maybe an additional part or just a discussion on the topic that were raised in these two parts could be thought of for the future. And we are now talking 3 hours and a half almost. I mean, for me personally, it was really very quick. It was funny, it was inspiring, it was interesting. But anyhow, I imagine that some of us are already a bit tired. In South Korea, it's late in the evening, isn't it? So it's very late. Even in Europe, we started this on a daily light, and now it's evening. It's night here as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you a lot for your contribution to the conference. And first of all, thank you, Susanna, once again for organizing it. And as Savas or Jeffrey or both of them has already mentioned, for being so persistent. And yeah, we thought that it would never happen, and finally we had such a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and hope to see you live in Bratislava or Seoul or anywhere.
Conference of Recyklácia Part 3. See you all.
Recycling, the conference on recycling.
Yes, thank you all. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Ivan, Savas.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's keep in touch.